Good morning, Kwe Wamachida. Welcome to all. Even if we are remotely meeting, I would like to take a moment here once again to thank you to have welcomed us on your respective territories. Thank you very much for being present today for the last of 3 webinars on the conservation. My name is Raphaël Pichet. I am the project manager in conservation at the Sustainable Development Institute of Quebec and Labrador. As usual, today's webinar is within the project of conservation and protection of nature. And we're very lucky today to have the participation of the Alitic Association for the Maliseet and Mi'kmaq and the Conseil of Huronne-wendat Nation that will speak to us about the conservation and restoration of the connectivity for American Eel. This project has really called to us by its importance. So we have talked about planning conservation through this concrete project that is happening on the field currently. So thank you to both of you to be present here. So I'll introduce our 2 presentators for today. We have M.Arsenault. She has a master's degree in geography, specializing in the collaboration management of natural resources in the Bassin Versant. She has acquired experience in many regions in Canada and has worked on different projects that had to do with geology, social geography, also as a consultant, a researcher, and also in teaching. Amélie is the Nionwentsïo project manager. She has a master's degree in biology. She was hired in 2012 and is in charge of all coordinations and the implementation of biological projects for about 10 years now. She has coordinated many different complex projects that touch different species, one of which we will see today. Amélie has a role of coordinator as well between partners to make sure that the goals of different projects are reached, resources, human resources, budgetary issues, etc. So Laurie, I will invite for you to share your screen with us. Lisa and Amélie, whenever you're ready, go ahead. Lisa speaking. Kwe, good morning. We both work on similar projects, so we have decided to combine our 2 presentations. Some information may be coming from one project or the other, but we'll try to make this seamless. So we'll say it in French and we will alternate and add on if one of us has forgotten some points or elements. So that's the way we're going to go. So thank you, Raphaël, for your introduction. So I will start by presenting the organization for which I work. It's the Alitic Indigenous Maliseet. As I was saying earlier, I'm from Gaskapijac. We serve 3 communities, the Mi'kmaq Maliseet Aboriginal Fisheries Management and the First Nation of Washipikuk, which used to be the Maliseets of Vigée. Since it's fairly recent, I'm not an expert in the pronunciation, but as you could see on the map here, we have a huge territory that we are covering. So you can change the slide now. So our first mission is to promote the sustainable management and conservation of aquatic and ocean ecosystems on the territories and activity zones of the Mi'kmaq of Gaskapidiac, the 3 nations that we serve, the Mi'kmaq of Gaspé, as well as the Maliseets of Vigée. And we want to do this while promoting their interest and participation in co-management processes. We also oversee fishing. We do research in fishing, as Alex has introduced himself earlier in Rimouski. We do many management and coastal marine life management and traditional. Everything is all done through the interest of the communities that we serve. Okay, I'll take the rest. Thank you very much for being here. Hello, thank you, Lisa. As she said, we will be doing this presentation together. I work directly for the Band Council of the Huron-Wendat Nation. Within the WMAW, there is an editorial team which includes a team of professionals, multidisciplinary teams. We have anthropologists, etc. We play many roles within our functions. We answer to consultations. We do regional representations, the supervision of guardians of the territory, the management of the tourism sector as well. And of course, this project is more within the wildlife territorial development and conservation of threatened species projects. So the eel has become something that we love now. So now this is the territory that we cover. So the projects that we realize or that we implement around this territory, which is a customary territory for the Huron-Wendat Nation. Next slide, I think it's Lisa, your turn. Yes, actually the American eel, the Anguilla rotrata and gawat, and I'm gonna try here, Tia 8 Wenroyo, Tiawit and Royo in Wendat. So is that it, Amélie? Well, it seems to be the way you say it, yes. At the end of the presentation, if any of you have different ways of saying the American eel in your language, I would love for you to share that with us. So this is a culturally important species for First Nations, well, basically for the nations that we serve. As you know, it was something very important for the traditional activity of eel fishing. You probably heard about the drumming and the use of drums and harpoons and spears and traps to fish for eel. And it was also an activity that we have gathered the use. And there was also medicinal benefits within the oil, skin, and eggs of the eel. You probably heard of those uses, and maybe you may think of other uses that are not listed here. In the researches we've gone through, we found out that there were mentions from Father Lallemand. There were 40,000 taken in 1646, 40,000 eels. And for government statistics for 1886, in 1 year, there was, and currently we are exporting 30 tons. So just to tell you how much we had so much more eel before, they had 650 tons that were exported annually, and now we're down to 30 tons. So that is a drastic reduction in the population of eel. So the American eel is a very fascinating species. We don't actually know exactly how they reproduce. It happens a little bit around the Sargasso Sea, where you could see here on the image, we find eggs and larvae in that sector, but we don't know exactly how it happens. And all of the American population, even the European population of eel, join themselves in this area to reproduce. So what we see is the eggs and the lakes slide down around the American continent, and it all goes all the way down to the St. Lawrence Gulf and in the St. Lawrence River and populate all rivers in the province of Quebec. So when they arrive within the Gulf of St. Lawrence and the Lisa area, they have this aspect here. It's a glass eel. It's an approximate size of 5 to 8 centimeters. And then the eel will disperse themselves, like I said, in all rivers in Quebec. It's a very generalized species. It's not like salmon, where they have very specific characteristic in their environments. They really spread out a little bit everywhere. So this is a map of where they might spread out. And I can tell you that there's a mistake here. There are some eels that go up all the way up to Lake St. John. They don't just stop here. So they really come through the St. Lawrence River, and then they will scatter and spread around in all rivers across the Quebec province. And I'll go back to this on the next slide. So as I was saying, eel is a very special species. They don't jump, but they're able to crawl. They're able to crawl out of the water and go above and beyond different obstacles. So when they're at this stage of glass eel, you could see on the left, that is the glass eel stage on the wall there. So when they are at the glass eel stage, they can go up vertical obstacles. All they need is a wet surface, because when the eel goes out of the water, they must breathe through their pores, the pore in their skin. And they need a surface on which they can grab onto. So it's like a snake. They need a surface where they can grab onto and crawl up. So as you see here on the left, a glass eel is in that stage only for about a year. And then it becomes a yellow eel, as you could see on the right picture. Here you could see that rocks and the water on that rock is enabling the eel to go up on it and cross over that obstacle. In Quebec, the silver eel will go through only one reproduction cycle. So when they become a silver eel here, like you could see on the picture, their digestive system becomes their reproductive system. It is actually replaced by their reproductive system. So they go through the reproduction cycle for one cycle and then they die. They will stay for about 20 years in our waters. So when the eels go to reproduce, we see them during the fall. So that's why the commercial fisheries, we had data that they were showing up in the St. Lawrence River in the fall period. And in Quebec, what's interesting is that 95% of the adults that we find within our waters are females. Males will be found more in Nova Scotia or along the coastlines of the US. That's the way it is. I don't have anything to explain that, but we can't take any eels from Nova Scotia and bring them down to Quebec because they don't have the right or proper genetics to be able to reproduce here. So we really need to find a solution to help our eel reproduce in our waters. I think it's your turn, Lisa. Yeah, it's my turn. I just wanted to add on to what Amélie was saying. The glass eels that you saw, once they come into our estuaries, as Amélie was saying, they come through our estuaries from every part of the province. And when they get into their specific river, their pigmentation changes. So as Amélie was showing, they become a little more of a grayish or of a dark green grayish. It's hard to describe as in terms of color, but as Amélie was explaining, it's pretty mysterious how they reproduce and when they reproduce. They cannot reproduce in captivity. They have to be in the wild. So this brings us to the fact and the recognition that this is a species at risk. Since the end of 2012, we've seen a huge reduction and huge decline in the population, not only in Quebec, but all over the east coast of America. We've been saying this since the last 25 years. This eel has been under the federal law for species at risk. At the provincial level, they are a susceptible species at risk, but it's changing now. So as Amélie was saying, mainly it is the females that will go up the streams and be able to reproduce in a lake of quality. So they have the instincts to go all the way up to a lake or a habitat that is proper for them, a proper habitat for them. So, of course, as Amélie was saying, the St. Lawrence rivers were full of eels in fall. So in the context of our restoration projects, we have realized, the scientific community has realized that the habitat fragmentation is one of the main causes of the species decline. There are many other causes as well, but this reduced the swimming capacity of the eels. So researchers and scientists have come to a common agreement that that is something we can manage. So as for myself and Amélie, we feel that we can focus on this part and do something about it. And biologically, the eels have other capacities, adaptation capacities. So they're not like trout. So even though there is an obstacle, may it be a natural or unnatural obstacle, they are able to cross over it to find another habitat that would be proper for them to reproduce. So that's why when we evaluate or assess the free movement at obstacles, it's done by considering specific criteria specific to the eel. So those are points or elements that have not been taken into consideration in the past, but I have words in English here. We have fish ladders for the eels that could help the eel cross over some different obstacles. So often now we could see recent installations and constructions that have not taken into account different characteristics of eels. So when we look at an obstacle and see if the eel can cross over it, we need to look if there is a bank or a crawling substrate that is wet so that they can crawl over it. They cannot crawl on gravel or on dry gravel. We need to look at the materials of the obstacle. Is there a slope of embankments? Is the obstacle rough or slick? Is there a slope? We need to look at the fall height and the slope of the embankment. So this is all the information we must take into account when we assess an obstacle. So here you have pictures of different obstacles on different territories. Of course, in Gatineau, we don't have as much waterfalls, but there are some obstacles. You can have bigger dikes in the Wendat territory. We have waterfalls, natural barriers as well. There are dams as well. So I'm just going to go back here for a second. For our restoration projects, both of our organizations have benefited from funds. And this is a pluri-annual program. So we've had access to this program over 4 years, and Amélie has access to it for 5 years. So this has enabled us in the first step to identify all obstacles on the territories that we serve. So as I have mentioned earlier, dams, waterfalls, and different obstacles, man-made obstacles as well. So I think this slide is yours, Amélie. Yeah, it's mine. So as Lisa was saying, we do have a recovery plan. It is not a recovery team or official plan, but these are more solutions that we found so that we can come to the recovery of the eels. So as soon as there's a new dam that is being constructed or any other construction, we need to ensure that they have access to a way to crawl over it. So if you see that it might be inaccessible, do not hesitate to point it out. So in the medium term, what we want to do is improve the fish passages and access to production areas that we have lost in the last 3 generations. So as we were saying, there was a loss of access for the last 22 years, about 22 years. So there was a reproduction cycle that was skipped. So as we were saying, there were calveats or dams in the 18th or 19th or 20th century. The eel has had a lot of difficulty with the improvement of our engineering. We have dams with slick surfaces, and that has become a great obstacle for eels. In the old days, dams were made out of wood or earthly products. So that would give a chance to the eel to cross over it. But now with the new constructions that are slick, the issue has become more important and more urgent for eels that go through the St. Lawrence River and go into the watersheds don't necessarily have that issue, but there are still some obstacles. So next slide, please. So as Lisa was saying, the goal of the project, this is really the project objective for the coastal restoration. So we're determining the historical and contemporary distribution or their dimensions at the First Nations level. That can also be relevant, but some rivers, there are some rivers where the eel does not go at all. We don't know why yet, but we still have to assess the possibility of dams, culverts, and natural obstacles. Then to prioritize where we want to do some work and layouts, we do calculate the potential habitat gains. Then we need to carry out a feasibility study for the installation of eel ladders and priority obstacles. We make adaptations to allow the passage of the American eel, and we assess the effectiveness of the adaptations. Of course, we must mobilize local actors in the recovery of the American eel. We have many stakeholders with which we speak for these projects.
So the results of my team, especially, we worked on 33 watersheds, 209 inventory days. We visited 303 obstacles. And we also did some night run observations because the eel is easier for inventories. What we do is we find an obstacle and we visit the obstacle in the early morning, and we can see if the eel can go up the obstacle. But we need safety measures, of course, because it's low technology, and also we do some fishing stations and the passive fishing stations. There are 62 of those. And regarding restoration activities, we have 17 improvements, either culverts, as we saw in the preceding picture, which is elevated, and so we'll create rocks around in order to raise upstream the water. Also, we install temporary eel ladders, so we have to do this annually, and some of them we will do it on a permanent basis. And then, as I said, we met many owners and many participating local organizations and developed long-term some agreements. And so I think you were saying we need to take a break. Do you want us? Yes, I think it would be a good moment, just to take a small break of 10 minutes. So we'll come back at 10:12. Okay, we'll start. It's 10:12. So Lisa, Amélie, do you want to start? I was just wondering if, because in order to show you what I was talking about, to the left, what we see is a culvert. As I was saying, we did some placement of rocks around it in order for the water level to go through in a more natural way, in order not to have a vertical gap. And the other two pictures is these are ladders, temporary ladders that we can uninstall. And there's a rest watershed there for the eel, and there's a solar panel. It's not always possible to have direct electricity, and so we also restored and gives an access to 4,800 hectares of habitat. Yes, we have no year. We did some, this year we have more than 2,000 hectares of gain in habitats. And also we have a team, a small team compared to the council. And as I said, there's not many lakes. So when we have obstacles, we'll put the money and the energy in order to have a quality habitat upstream. And so this is also a challenge to find the proper habitat or the obstacle where we would like to concentrate, to focus on. The next slide, Raphael, thank you. And so here, as a summary, the results of our restoration recovery projects, we characterized several obstacles, I would say, between Rivière-du-Loup and Gaspé, and many on the 3 territories that we serve on many watersheds, and we also did some electric fishing. But up to now, we weren't able. It wasn't necessary to use it to confirm the presence of eels. We did also night observations, as Amélie was saying, and this is new for us. Helps us to discover a new activity during the evenings in the summer. So that's very interesting, especially that we saw the first time when we did it. It really helped, motivated the team, and also we set up trap pass. We had instantaneous health. We were very lucky, we were told, and because it's very rare to see right away. So right away, then we saw them run, and we prepared a pass for the summer. We also did the installation of the passes and the ladders, like Amélie was saying, but ours are a little bit different. There we have a solar pump with a solar panel with a permanent ladder. We also did some environmental DNA with some eels concentrated in a lake on the Giskapigag territory. So at the bottom here, we can see is one of our ladders. Well, this is the pass. We could see at the bottom here the pond or the basin. We can see the eel in the pool, and we can see one coming up there, ramping up, and the solar pump, and the pump allows water to come up when they're migrating. And so we have a new pool, a new basin, and that we measured in the morning. So this is near Gaspé. 500 eels in this pass trap. Which gives access to the drinking water of in the region of Gaspé. So it's the watershed of Dartmouth. And so this was an instantaneous success. And this gave gains of quality habitat in the Lower North Shore. And next year we're going to work in the Rimouski, the basin where there's many eels, but there's also a lot of obstacles and dams that give access to many beautiful lakes. And so we're focusing on that. It varies a lot depending on who you're talking to. Also, I met a lot of people with a disdain of eels in relation to other species. This can come from the owners on different banks, the bank owners, and so this creates difficulties because some people were not happy to see us coming. And of course, when we talk about the preparations that we need to install and uninstall every year, so we have a long-term commitment, and I know that probably most of you know it's not the type of things that people like to talk about. It's difficult to get those commitments from people, and so this is an obstacle for the installation of these management installations. Also for the eel, I'm very fascinated with the species, and this is what we see on the to the right. This is a Gamelin fall near the Haha River near the Saguenay, and I still don't understand how the eel can go up these rapids. We can't see it well here, but it's really vertical and very high. But we have a lot of historical mentions upstream that the eel has to go through these falls. So it's really fascinating. I'm really astounded by the capacity of the species, and we scratch our heads sometimes with these obstacles that they conquer. So just to add to this, sometimes we say yes. Our order is it has to be always whatever the season. So that's why when we have questions, it always has to be passable. So if there's a dry season and the water is very low, we think that with the installations that we put in, it will help. And it's always a little bit different also when we talk about natural obstacles versus anthropogenic obstacles. I don't think it's a problem for the natural obstacles. We're just wondering sometimes that the upstream obstacles are worthwhile, but like Lisa was saying, you can maybe set an operation mode, or we can look for eels or with the historical mentions. That's very important. All this briefly to say that if you meet people who have worries with the eel, and there is a scientific the scientific committee of salmon has positioned itself favorable to restore access to eels in salmon rivers where the installation of anthropogenic obstacles has hampered upstream access. And we can see also that there's no indication that eels adversely interfere with Atlantic salmon. And we can see here on the graphic in 1987, we added a passage for the eel, and they started to go into this river, and we can see that the increase of the salmon population increase, it's not a cause effect relationship here, but it's just an example that shows that the return of the eel in the river where the salmon was did not at least negatively impact the salmon population. And so the committee approves our works. And so this is just something I wanted to underscore and give you this information. I think the closing remarks are with Lisa. Yes, well, I think that we talked about it, Amélie and myself, during the presentation, but of course we have some project benefits. And so on a long-term basis, it allows the monitoring and improvement, and the improvement of interventions, allows also the reinforcement of our capacities, development of our capacities. As I said many times, we had never worked with the eel. And so it's really something we had the opportunity to be trained in many things. And of course, we're helped with different specialists, experts who share with us their expertise while we're doing this. And also the acquisition of knowledge on of a key species. So this is key for First Nations because these species are in decline. And so this is a plus value. And so as a summary, also, we have we improve the ecological integrity of the territories for the free passage of the species. So we are giving back the access. So these are really practical results that we don't have in other projects, which are measurable. And so this is it's a big boost when we work in conservation. Kiawank, Waliek, Waliwun, thank you, merci. So Tiawank, thank you. These are the logos, the different logos of the owners and partners and funders, and I think it's the same thing for Lisa. So we're at the question period now, so don't hesitate. I really like to talk about eels. Thank you very much for your presentation. It was really interesting, and I think that we underestimate the eel. I think it's a fascinating species. Do you have any questions, dear participants, or do you want a few seconds to think about your question? If not, I have prepared a few. Yeah, I have a few also. Yes, maybe I have one. If I can, yes, go ahead, Pauline. Maybe I didn't get that part, but regarding the long-term funding, because it's really one of the main plus of your project and you underscored it in your introduction. I just want to have to hear you on this, the different challenges or how you achieve to finance this on the long-term basis, or this major issue. And I think this is shared by many persons on the long-term. Well, when we're talking about, we had some envelopes for 4 or 5 years versus a 1-year envelope. So this is long-term, 4 or 5 years. But unfortunately, there's an end to it. And so, of course, this program especially offered us, which is offered a multi-annual or pluri-annual, brought for sure a better project because for me, like this year, it's the last year, but we're going to return to do some installations that we did in 2019 in order to do improvements to help handling of these installations. Another advantage also, this allows us to go back and see if the installations are working or not. And so also this allows also to work on the first watershed, and then we can see it in the coming years. And so this gives us this opportunity. So for me, the programs, for funding to do longer term projects will be seen always positively. I don't have a problem to have accountability, but I think it's easier to achieve these projects on a long term basis. But I don't have no advice to give. But this is always something that I ask when I talk to government entities, and also on a long-term basis, I have also no advice to give you. I don't find any. I was never able to really achieve a longer-term funding, but there are some owners, and I have developed some agreements and different owners who are committed with me and say that have told me that we're going with you with a long-term project. We'll install and uninstall, but 90% of people don't want to hear anything about this. And so generally when I go to the OBVs, and it's always not all the OBVs that accept to participate in my project. And so this is a problem that I have right now. And since there are different installations that the council, the band council will have to assume the long-term funds or costs. So we have some issues sometimes, but we won't let them down because we like our projects. So I don't know, Lisa, if you want to add anything to this. Well, like you're saying, it's rare the projects that we had, long-term projects, 5 years, that's the longest one I've seen up to date. And we understand there's political here. Nobody wants to commit themselves on a long-term basis. And lately, people, we were told a project that was supposed to be 5 years was cut to 3 years. And so I'm also a spokesperson if we want to apply the funds for species at risk for First Nations, and they answer very late when you can't even go on the ground when it's over a year. It's really nonsense, ridiculous. So we want to continue. And so the benefits over 4 years, we talked about our teams, we have knowledge, we have a list of obstacles. Of course, we won't have time to do everything, but I have the opportunity to work for an organization where we have different types of funding. And I'm looking at, I want this to continue and to the efficiency of our installations. So we want to tag eels, and so we want a continuity. And so I think I have the MFFP and the federal now working together. So, and it's more and more serious for a species at risk in Canada. And so this gives unfortunately, for the eel and funding, so this will be like a snowball effect. There's like a momentum and an effect here. And I know that at the provincial level, I have the backup. They don't have money, but they will back me with permits and to do more collection of data on the field for the species. But of course, for them also, the biologists, as I were saying, we can have a lot of installations and no follow-up because the funding is stopped. And so, of course, they're going to encourage them to facilitate or to help us, come with us. And so this is a lot of support with their biologists and technicians. So at least we have this effect. And so I don't know if this answers your question. Well, not well. At least it adds to the case, and this is what we see. What type of species, and so this is a question that comes many times because there's a lot of different approaches, programs, federal on the territory is something that we really came back on, saying, okay, that's good, but we have this nice initiative, but the funding is such on a short-term basis. So they're documenting what's being done, like you're just presenting what was done before, and so we can use this in order to get new funding, but especially to encourage this on a long-term basis. And the reason is political, and all the budgets are done over 4 years as a maximum. And so I don't have no other solutions to propose either. So, but I think this discussion will always comes back, but it's wonderful to see at least the project for more than 2 years already. Yes, also another benefit is with the federal and the provincial, they made a bank, created a bank, tender bank for obstacles. for that species and other species. So that with this we have some money we won't have money to recover, but we have this big fund, so we'll be able to choose a partner with Quebec or another partner to compensate, and so they can say, okay, I'm going to put a ramp on this culvert, and this so maybe it should be us or the huronne-wendat who does the characterization and be involved in all this process and to be employed as consultant. So this creates a revenue which not associated with the, and so you can take this money, for example, that we did as a profit and put it finally in to tag eels and do other. So this is a venue which comes out from this, which derives from this. Super interesting. Thank you. Thank you, Pauline, for your question. Do we have other questions? I would like to, I don't want to take somebody else's place who wants to ask a question, but you mentioned the OPVs. How's the relationship with these types of organizations? I know that in Outaouais region, Ottawa River Keepers, who works a lot on with the eel, is what's the relationship between the NGO or indigenous organization? How did this work for you? Well, I would say that it's different. It depends on who you're talking to. If there's some OBVs, it wasn't a problem. Do you want to commit yourself on the long term? They'll say, oh, no problem, thank you very much. Others, I was refused via their board. The others, it's the directors who refused me. Other directors accept me. So it varies. So the relationship, well, generally speaking, Quebec, to have information, I have no problem. I have the information was transmitted with, but sometimes there's certain competition, because the OBVs sometimes want to work on the with the same things as us. So sometimes there can be some competition, or sometimes it can be more cooperative. Sometimes I have a salmon, a river project this year with an OBV, and so we pay. So all the situations, there's a lot of different situation. It could be medium, it can be negative. So I don't know what you're experiencing, Lisa. Well, we had an upstream work that was done. I represent, I think, 4 watersheds on the lower North Shore around Rivière-du-Loup, a big organization. We were starting with different obstacles that were identified in collaboration with the Kakuna Nation. And this was before we were involved. And I did not have time to work. We're working with a pourvoirie. I visited the questions with the Gaspésie, and I'm waiting for documents. But when Amélie was saying when we have heard that when there's funding and there's no Indigenous partner, but when I'm looking for information, I won't have problems to receive it. But I never had, or I never had to ask them for help, for example, for the ladders, for the permanent ladders, or things to be done in the winter. So I have not yet had this problem. Next question in the chat from Roseanne.
When in the life cycle of the eel does it leave the watershed for the Sargassy? Have you witnessed this departure as well?
This will be done in August or in the fall, depending on where we are. I never saw this. We even tried to capture some, but we were not able to do that. Lisa? Well, like you, I have in the Cascapedia River, and it's in October. Well, all the commercial fishing, it's the adults who goes towards the Sea of Sargasso, and they have a crop. They collect in mid-September, October. It's a lot in the lower North Shore near Kamirasca, the last commercial fishing. Thank you. Do we have any other questions? If not, I have a more specific one regarding planning of your projects. When you have identified the main obstacles or causes of the decline, which were the obstacles, but have you planned? Are there other causes? Did you identify priorities? And how did you identify priorities and of what cause to treat first? And maybe there are other causes also that in the future that you need to work on regarding the decline of the eel. Well, before having the funding, before the funding in 2007, I started to work with the eel in 2014, and I never stopped since then. But in the first subsidies, I think, if I remember well, I just consulted the documents, the federal ones and provincial documents that established the priorities. And I think that initially, in collaboration also with the ministry, they aligned me with this issue. And so slowly this developed. And for the other problems, we're talking about the depth of the eel and linked to the electric turbines. And if you have many millions of dollars, you can deal with this issue. If not, you'll have to find your money. But there are some organizations that exist, but a lot of these projects are very have a high cost. Of course, we need to improve the habitat of the eel and so that in order to achieve a longer life span for the eel, so less pollution in the river is better for the eel to. But of course, the obstacle for migration was established in the priorities, and it appeared as something which was feasible, even though it's relatively expensive, but it's not millions of dollars, tens of thousands of dollars. It's not a given either, but it's possible to implement it. And so, Lisa, do you want to add something? Yes, I just wanted to say, yes, the situation, well, while we worked with, in order to identify obstacles with the funds for, indigenous funds for species at risk in the Bas Saint Laurent in the lower North Shore, and we worked a little bit in the reverse way when we received the funds for, and so we were not to be taken in the first tour, and then it was in the fall, and then we were wondering what we're going to do. So it took a lot of time to consult our communities, because we need to meet question if because there can be an interest, and so we saw different things also than the eels at that time, but it became difficult to embark in 3 different communities, but the eel touched on 3 communities. So and as we're saying, the eel has a big problem. There's a big decline, but the habitat was cut by different dams, especially with the Great Lakes basins. But there's also other fishing and everything that we don't know in the sea. And so, but one thing that we can have an impact on is to reconnect its habitat, and so that's for the eel. So this is the thing we can do, or about the only thing that we can do. And as Amélie is saying, it's not always simple to deal with big dams. It's not easy. It's not cheap. Thank you. There's a question from David. Yes, I don't know if I missed it at the presentation. Maybe it's the eel will breed in the Caribbean, and then they come to the eastern coast of the of the United States. I'm just wondering, is it the same population, or is there a strategy to get a wider habitat on the eastern coast in New Brunswick? So is this something that that you're looking at, that there's a potential in order to achieve this? Well, for the first question, okay, go ahead, Lisa. Well, I don't know if there's a group of scientists working with the eels, which is Pan American, Canada, US, who are looking into these questions or things, and I know that on the eastern coast, they're advanced and they're also blowing up some dams. What I understand, I don't have all the details on this, and for sure for us being a group, we're in link. For example, this project affects many of the groups like us. With the Mi'kmaq and affects New Brunswick, but there's also other indigenous fishing and commercial fishing also. But it would be good to get all together and share. But this is what we're trying to do with this project. These are some of the benefits because we make presentations to other groups like us, and we have also a lot of requests. Well, I was just going to say, yes, it's the same population, the American population, or on the eastern population of North America, which will they all reproduce, they all interbreed, and for me, in order to have worked on the eastern coast, for sure, the requests have to come from the communities or organizations. But yes, we could go and help them, but of course that's a little bit outside of our territory. But there's things to be done there. Well, everywhere where we have eel, I think this project can be applied. Thank you. Super. Pierre-Luc? Yes, I understand that your project deals with the artificial obstacles which fragmented the territory, but I was wondering also if the natural obstacles, for example, if you have a big rapid, a little bit too big for the eels, in your projects, do you install or would you install passes for these natural obstacles? And if yes, I was just wondering if there could be some counter ecological indications in order to bring the eels who were never there before in the new rivers that could create an imbalance at certain levels. Well, we didn't do any. There's a lot of obstacles, artificial obstacles to deal with that we don't have time to deal with natural obstacles. So I don't know what they would say. I think it would be historically if there was, for example, that keeps the eel from going up, running up, if there's a log jam or something historically, or same thing for us. These are good questions to be asked, but for us also, what's difficult sometimes is the upstream mentions watersheds is something it's rare because the commercial fishing was more in the St. Lawrence River. The concentrations are more in the St. Lawrence or at the bottom of rapids, falls. But it doesn't mean that the eels didn't go upstream of the fall, but it's more complicated, or at least we don't have the information. So to work on a fall, I think it's against, or it wouldn't be be seen for now.
But to lay out an obstacle upstream, if there is no obstacle downstream, historically, if the anthropical obstacle is the one that clearly is blocking, then we won't actually have any layouts upstreams, but it's always preferable to have those. But we haven't gone through there through that deeply, but it's true we need to look at the anthropic obstacles. But there is a question, historically, has the rate of flow of rivers and falls and waterfalls, have they changed? Today, they're probably higher than they were about 100 years ago, because now there is a city that has been built everywhere. So the flow of the St. Charles River is probably higher, the flow rate. So could that affect the eel particularly or specifically? That's a good question. Okay, well, thank you very much. Yes, actually I have a question for the eel and the river flow. in your assessment, do you also look at the flow of the river? Because you have mentioned that they have a low swimming capacity. So, for example, for the Asian fish, I know that is something that they look at, but do you look at that particular item for eels as well? Well, personally, I haven't looked at that element because what I've realized throughout this project is that it's immensely variable. It could change any day. One day the flow of the river could be crazy, and then the next day it could be super slow. So we basically try to imagine different conditions within the eel has to go through. So when we look at the water flow, we have to see if it's mainly crossable. Well, at some point we do had a velometer. We were looking at the database for the MMAFMA and the associations that were trying to build up a database. So that was a element that we looked at, and we did our assessments in the time frame where they were migrating. So that gave us an idea of the different obstacles and different flow rates of rivers. But each watershed reacts differently, but we did have that supplemental data, but I'm not sure if it's really something that could be relevant. Okay, well, thank you. Do we have any other specific questions for the American Eel project? If not, we can go back to it. We would like to push things a little further and speak not only of the eel, but also speak of restoration projects for other species. We'd like to hear you out, Melissa, Amélie, and any other person who would like to. If you would like to talk to us about projects past or current projects or future projects that you would like to implement, so that we can share your experience together. And also we'd like to hear you out on how easy it was, what you would suggest that could be done differently on these different projects, and if you have come to any obstacles in your project. So do not hesitate to take the microphone if you have information to share with us. I'm going to let you think about that, but in the meantime, Amélie, you had talked about the future salmon project. Well, no, it's not a restorative project, actually. It's more a project for knowledge, but in the restoring of habitats, we have done some land work for the different frays and reproduction areas, but we really need funding. We don't have much experience in that personally, but I don't know if Lisa or someone else could have something to say. Well, not so much, but I could say that with the coastal restoration projects, we had choices to make, and we have lost a little bit of time. But what I was looking at was the restoration of the coastal areas of the 3 communities that we serve, because they have been closed down and they were used to going there. So it seemed very difficult for the MPO, the equivalent of the MAPAC at the federal level, the MPO. It seemed very difficult to look at that information. You can get lost. I needed an expert with me by my side to get some clear view of the information, or to go and harvest more information on that huge territory. So of course that would be great. That would be the next step if we still had some restoration funds to do so. Would anyone else like to share their experience? If not, then I would invite Kenneth to give us the word for eel in his language.
It's pronounced Jowarungo. I had to ask somebody who had to ask somebody, because I didn't know the word offhand, and neither did they, my primary source.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kenneth.
And someone wrote Pimisi in Algonquin, so maybe they can pronounce it if they're online right now.
Oh yeah, I think Roseanne just has left us a few minutes ago. I think it was her. And Raphael, did you have any other questions that you wanted to go more in depth? Yes, I have many questions. Actually, my question is a little bit about relating your project to other culturally important species, or maybe some threatening species. Would the knowledge or specific knowledge that you have acquired on eel, could that be applied to other type of species, may they be invasive or species at risk? So for example, obstacles that you have characterized, could they be an obstacle for a more invasive species like the Asian carp? Well, the obstacles that we have seen on the slides, those obstacles are specific to the eel. They go in through an area where there is a water flow, a current, ongoing water flow during the nighttime. They can go through that obstacle. But if there was a waterfall or a drop upstream of an area they want to go to, if we increase the water levels, that could enable another type of species to cross over that obstacle, and sometimes that could happen in watersheds. There could be that issue. I haven't seen this issue, but I don't know if Amélie has encountered that type of problem, but no, for us either, we didn't see any type of problem like that. I had questions about the black spot govier, which is an invasive small type of fish. But for the Asian carp, we had been contacted before by the ministry, and I had given them information on what we were doing. They had extra questions to answer, so they went through different assessments, and I think the water flow was more important to them, and I didn't have that data, so they had to go through another means to get that information. So that's about it. Thank you, Raphael. In a planning perspective, do you use specific tools? As you were saying, Melissa, in the beginning, you had worked with different watershed organizations to identify priorities. Have you been using different planning tools? No, we really just use an Excel database. I have used a Kogo to type in field data, and we have tested different things, but we were just doubling our work if we were going through their application and then going through our own data entry. So we have limited our data entry to the Excel sheet. Yeah, for my part, I mostly use Excel or ArcGIS. I'm a big fan of tasks in Outlook, but aside from that, that's about it. Okay, thank you. If we have no further questions, we really would like to hear you out, all of you, everyone, on the type of support that you would need more specifically related to the restoration of habitats for specific species. You can talk right now, or if not, do not hesitate to write to us on the webinar email, or you could write to Raphael. Her email is available, and I presume that Lisa and Amélie are going to stay here with us to answer questions. At the same time, we don't want to bulk up your email box, but if you have any questions, go ahead. Oh, Pauline, you have a question? Well, it's not so much so the restoration, but it's more about the connectivity of residual parts. It's more about forestry and projects in the north and Temiskaming. We see that there are a lot of projects in the south which are not necessarily recorded. For example, we have a platform where we enter different sources of information and technical support. Maybe that could be an avenue to enter all of this data, so that we can put our efforts in common at a more higher scale and see all initiatives that are ongoing at the same time, and that we could put this information in common so that we can finally end up with more information on programs or funding that could cover projects at a larger scale. Unfortunately, I don't have much experience with restoration. I'm not so much implied or involved with that, but I take this opportunity to mention that there are other projects. Yes, you're right, Pauline. Any other project that could be linked to restoration would be a great asset to our projects. So if there are no other comments, I would leave the floor to Raphael so she may conclude this webinar. Yes, well, thank you. Thank you very much to our two presentators for your very interesting presentation. In my case, I have learned a lot on eel. That is the species that I didn't know much about. So if you have any other questions or suggestions, do not hesitate to write to me. I know that it was mentioned in the last webinar. We have produced a sheet on the two presentations that had the atlases and maps included in it. So it's the end of this webinar. I would like to thank all participants and both translators. This is very important work for everyone to be able to assist these webinars. I thank my colleagues, Amélie and Lisa. You did a great presentation. Thank you for that. Well, thank you everyone. And finally, I would like to highlight financial funding and contribution from the Association of Environment Canada. So thank you for being here and have a great day. Bye. Thank you.